The CCCC Tour was an amazing journey, and what we learnt was a lot about exploring the processes behind the creation of co-housing cooperative initiatives. We spent 5 weeks away, and I met with and discussed and interviewed leaders who, through developing policy, creating financial structures, agreements, designing and building housing, and even living in the types of communities. We've got a lot to learn in Australia, and the findings that we learnt from that overseas trip have been really useful, sometimes actually quite surprising. First part of the journey was spent in the United Kingdom, and I had time around London, Birmingham, Sheffield, Cambridge. The best bit about the Birmingham trip was meeting up again with Nick Abbey, and also people like Nathan Derbury, who were involved heavily with a charitable trust for the ageing, and we looked at a central hub for the aged, and it really proved to me that a central hub and volunteerism really creates a wonderful community where people come together and meet, work and play and be active, and it proves that the aged don't have to be in isolation. The worst thing for the aged is actually being isolated and lonely, and the Birmingham experience really showed that this increase in housing choice for the aged really leads to a greater ability to be independent, maintain independence and to minimise loneliness. So the segregation for various sections of the community, both people that can afford housing or people that are in rental-based accommodation and even people that are marginalised, this ability to bring people together in communities was a really important element of that particular visit. A wonderful, really wonderful example. I had a great opportunity to meet a number of researchers at the London School of Economics, and the key bit from the researchers really indicated to me that our planning system's very much the same, and the movement in Europe, especially on the continent and especially in Germany and France, the housing movements actually come from a history of radicalisation of the housing movements, and it actually convinced me that a number of the systems that we are trying to adopt here are held back because the history and the nature of the movements in Europe are very different and come from a very different structure of the 1960s and the 1970s, which has proven that people take a different view and a different approach to cooperative housing and co-housing. So one of the really exciting pieces of my trip to London was to look at some of the alternative housing solutions that were created and established for low income and also for crisis accommodation. In a number of the locations, the English have used shipping containers as a crisis housing solution. The great example here that we are looking at shows some of the solutions that can be wedged into an existing neighbourhood with very simple solutions and very simple planning outcomes. They reduce cost and wastage, format simple. There's little attention to detail, I guess, from a design perspective, but the thing that I really noticed is that they are quite environmentally sensitive because they're easy to dismantle and reuse and shift somewhere else with some minor refurbishment. So the ability to mobilise and provide accommodation like this is a really cost-effective solution for local government. I met with Astrid and Steve Cook in London out Tottenham Way mid-June, And we talked about post-occupancy evaluation. Astrid has been using this model on the social housing projects that she is involved with in that area, and there's literally thousands of units of accommodation for socially deprived and low-income housing. Our business, Gerard Coutts and Associates, are project managers and property consultants, and we deal with landowner groups. The striking impact for that interview process was that we are doing things right. We actually have been learning from the positive outcomes from our land assembly groups and applying a post-occupancy evaluation to that particular process to ensure that our groups continue to improve and work harder and improve over time. I had a terrific day meeting Emily and Debbie at a community land trust, which is an unfamiliar terminology in Australia. And what we learned from that, and what Melbourne and Australia can learn from that, is about the functioning of these mechanisms, which is an unfamiliar space. The CLT is a land trust, non-profit, community-based organisation run by volunteers, in effect. What we learned is it requires structure and needs generated by what I would term specialised policy, I guess. But it's a really impressive housing initiative that can successfully overcome barriers to get bricks and mortar on the ground. That's it in its purest sense. Had a terrific day. They were really excited to talk about the opportunity, the program, and the success and failures of that particular outcome on that particular project. And it's a great credit to them, and we have so much to learn here about these alternative methods. I had the great pleasure of meeting Adam Broadway and Steve Cook in Cambridge around mid-June. Adam Broadway is a facilitator with some cooperative and co-housing developments. The most important factors, I guess, in that discussion and interview was the project need for a facilitator. And Adam represented himself brilliantly because he's taken a personal investment in his time to the project success. There's not a lot of project managers that I see that are so committed to the property and project outcome. It was really a great reflection of how project management and facilitation successfully delivers projects. Especially from a community basis, this is a great reflection of the strength of that particular role. Wow, I can't describe how good Quarter Mile was. I had spent a couple of days in Edinburgh and all of a sudden was confronted by such a remarkable and remarkably resolved project. Just off the edge of town, in the suburb, was this wonderful mixed-use development which treated co-housing, cooperative housing and mixed-use development in a seamless manner. It was done through various tricks and high-quality urban design, and the indication to me was that everybody was treated with some level of respect. It was done through the landscape design, the urban planning, a remarkable solution that integrated social housing, low-income housing, and also normal housing, all in one development, and it actually, to me, eliminated a social divide. Really, a project that's actually well worth another visit. The project site at Factory in Berlin was built along the Berlin Wall, and it showed how important low-rise residential and how low-rise residential can fit into a commercial precinct. It was a real positive, our planning constraints tend to hold us back from delivering great community outcomes, and you can't not get carried away or overwhelmed by the approaches that some of the European cities take to these types of projects. One of the great things that Melbourne can learn is how to knit and integrate these finer grained solutions into our urban fabric. It's something that we don't do very well, but the European cities actually show how successful some of the integration of these assets can work. My German is terrible. I call the project that I met Joel Dolroy at Holzmarktstraße or Strabe 25. This project, with my failing German, was a really good cooperative initiative that looked at cooperatives for development opportunities and commercial outcomes rather than being a purely residential system. It proved that you could have workspaces close to childcare and support networks, and it supported a really strong variety of commercial and creative spaces. We talked about his initiation of a social media platform for the Belgruppen. The key issue that I took away from that particular interview was land supply. Joel's comment was, everything worked quite well, but when land supply is a problem, the whole system tends to fail. And that was important to me because land supply is obviously a key issue no matter which major city you go to. Again in Berlin, I had the wonderful opportunity of meeting Christian Ring, the author of Self-Made City. She described the Belgruppen from a very different perspective. It's almost a pragmatic alternative, which is a common misconception associated with these types of housing models. She went to some length to explain that co-ops are created by groups of people that are wanting high quality living spaces at a low price. This kind of eliminates that middle transaction of having real estate agents and developers in the equation. And it was something, it was a conversation that really brought home as to why the Belgruppen type model could work well in the Australian cities, especially Melbourne. I had the great pleasure of meeting Tim Hyde in Berlin. Tim is a principal of von Beckwith and Hyde Architects, and they've had an enormous track record, or have an enormous track record in the development of Belgruppen housing models, and a number of those images are obviously included in this wrap-up video. The key issue in discussion with Tim is the work that the architect does in the establishment of the community and the cooperative. And I think the key message that I took away from that was really designing from the neighbourhood, or starting to design with the neighbourhood intent and the community attributes rather than just simply focusing on the building and built form. We spent 5 weeks overseas on this remarkable tour, looking at accommodation for older people, cooperatives, co-housing, and finally the Belgruppen. All of those different models and systems worked well when there was engagement with the stakeholders and the parties relating to these types of projects. If you can't get that collaboration working effectively, the other systems will fail. You've got to get that resolved at the start. That's a key element of project management, I think, working with those variety of stakeholders. I think we understand those systems really well, and that just brought home to us that those are the techniques that are required to make successful projects.